At the national level, I saw a lot of bad behavior being systemized within the system. The bottom line, Kenyans are really hardworking and they're very qualified. But then that cream on top is what brings the serious weakness. I know that, the executive control the parliament, and they drove the agenda, even the committees.
Na huyu anasema nataka kwenda interrogate Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Guy,
iwe iwalo lazima tujenge reli.
1.5 billion US dollars. Fellow Kenyans, I want to assure you that the government will spend this money prudently.
The early 2010s were hopeful times for Kenya's economy. The country was fully bought into a larger wave of optimism about Africa. This was going to be the decade that the great continent of Africa broke with its past and rose. But the international financing architecture had barely changed, favoring countries in the developed world.
There's a generic concern in relation to Africa that credit risk agencies, the Moody's and Post and so on of the world, are mispricing African risk. In other words, they're sending a signal to the market that the risk is far higher than is actually the case on the ground. And I think that assessment is right. Up until this recent crisis, much of Africa actually had a very strong record on, meeting repayment.
Times were changing though. China had come knocking on Africa's door, and the commercial bonds market of the West was open to Africans as well. By 2013, 11 African countries had entered the bonds market, and Kenya wasn't far behind.
Then 2014 comes and we debut our first sovereign bond, the Eurobond.
The country has cleared the way for its first Eurobond after Parliament amended the public finance law.
The Eurobond was issued in two parts. The second one, which amounts to about 131 billion shillings, will be repaid over 10 years and attract an interest rate of close to 6.9%.
1.5 billion US dollars due in 2024, priced at an interest rate of 6.875%. Indeed, very competitive rates.
With an additional tap sale of 750 million US dollars, Kenya's debut on the commercial bond market was the highest of any African country that year. The government sought to raise $2 billion and surpassed its own target. But soon, controversy arose over its remittance when it was found that the amount remitted to Kenya was less than the amount submitted to its lead managers in the United States. Pressure was building on the Kenyatta regime to account for these funds and deal with corruption, leading to a one-of-its-kind corruption summit held at State House.
when we go out there and we say Eurobond money was stolen and is stashed in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, are you telling me that the Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States have colluded?
And this is where perhaps the most naked sort of clash of opinions from your office and directly the office of the president happened at the corruption summit. Why were you so keen on going to New York to be able to establish what it is that you are looking for?
Na huyu anasema nataka kwenda interrogate Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Guy, you sit back and you ask yourself, are we being serious with what we are doing? Are we really being serious?
Actually, I really took it well. I thought the president was expressing his frustrations and what. But To me, I could understand his frustration because of the time and the situation at that time. I really did seek even to, after that, to tell him, Your Excellency, this is for us, for you and for the ordinary person, that I do these things properly.
We have the Auditor General keep saying money was stolen from Eurobond. Asema. I did not appoint you. All right? I cannot sack you.
It was purely because of the movements of the funds, how it went. Of course, the movement was such that then somehow Federal Reserve became to be, but of course it was all dollarized, isn't it? Yeah. Our banker was actually Federal Reserve, isn't it? Yeah, so how could I audit it? How could I query anything about Eurobond without actually even speaking to Federal Reserve? There is no apologies for that, because otherwise I would also could have been taken to task.
Do not kill the messenger. That is the message from the Auditor General Edward Ouko to the political class.
But as it turns out, there was cause for concern over the Eurobond. Ouko finally audited the usage of the Eurobond, and what he found pointed to Kenya's treasury breaking the country's laws.
One of the questions I think you asked in the report was on the payment of a syndicated loan using those funds. Why was that important?
That had to be very clear, and it has to come clear that we're taking money from this side, put it this side. And the question is, why? Is it because of transactional cost, or to bring in a syndicator to do something?
Because that to me felt a bit, strange, given that we've taken this loan. Shouldn't it hit the consolidated fund before any decisions made on whether to pay are done?
That's the point.
The reason that was given, which is on the record, is that, look, we owed this money anyway. So once we had gotten the facility, why not pay directly? Which might make sense, but it's not something the Constitution and the PFM laws require. Parliament didn't take that as seriously as it did. Instead of Parliament doing its work more seriously and with objectivity, went about it Parliament covering for the executive.
Kenya's treasury explained why it was able to pay out monies for the syndicated loan from the Eurobond funds, also commissioning an audit that gave the transaction a clean bill of health. But a deeper, far more important question lay not in how the Eurobond got into Kenya, but in what it was used for.
What was the Eurobond used for?
Eurobond really put me in a very difficult vis-a-vis my responsibility and my professional responsibility towards the Kenya. I said I'm not going to be an auditor which will give Kenyans half-sided assurance. Yet the most important thing for Kenyan, what did the Eurobond do? Where did the Eurobond go? What happened to Eurobond, isn't it? Yeah. So there's no way, in fact, I had a lot of pressure to try and give a report on Eurobond. But of course, I was not born yesterday, I'm a professional.
Here's a simple explanation of how Kenya is supposed to account for the monies that it borrows. First, as per its constitution and the Public Finance Management Act, Kenya is only supposed to borrow in the medium term to fund development. For example, infrastructure projects like road construction. Kenya's lenders are supposed to deposit the money borrowed into the country's consolidated fund. Simply put, Kenya's official bank account. When borrowing, Kenya's government needs to state what specific project the loan is supposed to fund. This was Kenya's external debt register as at the end of June 2022. The column called Loan Title will sometimes tell you what the project that the loan was taken for is supposed to finance. But in many cases, as with Kenya's sovereign bond, it doesn't state what the loan is for. That information isn't publicly available.
Do you know what it was used for?
Alan, I told you, government is a difficult animal. I recall when I was a chairman budget, through my committee, we insisted that for every debt the country gets into, it must be backed up by a list of projects that you're financing. Why? Because when I became chair budget, we tried to ask for a list of projects that have been funded by all this commercial debt. It was never forthcoming.
The question mark is then, where did the Eurobond go? What did it do?
That's $2 billion that we don't know where it went in this economy.
Tell me, $2 billion coming into this economy. And that's the point. The point, I was giving it time because the fact that it was in, you could see things.
Yeah.
You could see something happening, which is adding value.
And there have been calls both by people in and outside of Parliament for the proper, not just an audit, but for the debt register to be published. Who is owed on what terms and how much is paid so that the net effects can be.
Yeah.
The Treasury insists that its records regarding debt are very accurate. And every year Parliament approves billions of dollars worth of payments for debt redemption. But nobody knows who is being paid.
By the end of 2014, Kenya's borrowing was quickly becoming an addiction. And with Treasury playing fast and loose with the rules on borrowing and transparency around who was being paid and on what terms, it was only a matter of time before this indiscipline collided with a major corruption scandal.
The Cabinet Secretary, his Principal Secretary Kamau Thuge, Dr. Susan Koechu's the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of East Africa Community, are among the 21 suspects who are arraigned for the loss of millions of shillings meant for the construction of Kimwarer and Arrow dams.
In 2022, while campaigning to become Kenya's 5th president, then Deputy President William Ruto asked a question.
I am looking forward to the day somebody will step forward and actually tell the country how will the government of Kenya lose 20 billion shillings that was supposed to build Aror and Kimwarer?
In the next episode, we provide part of the answer, with documentation showing possible sleight of hand that turned the Kimwarer and Aror Dam project into a possible source for corruption. And with the help of a forensic auditor who worked for the government for close to 40 years.
This contractor was not supposed to be paid anything, was supposed to come with his money, construct Kimwarer and Aror.